Black and brown women in business here in the South Florida community. I would like to take the opportunity to thank Shelley Beth, she is our visionary, and she has been directing this steamship headstrong into great possibilities. And thanking our team at HQ who are doing an amazing job keeping everyone on top of everything that's happening despite COVID-19 and its impact on our businesses. With that said, I'd like to introduce you to my co-host, who is going to introduce our team. And our presentation today is how to create your pitch deck. So many of us are trying to raise money, and presentation is everything. And it starts with your pitch deck. Our mission is, as you see on the screen, we're impacting Black and brown women locally, nationally, and potentially globally. And I'm thinking that my colleague would like to take over from here.
Sure, so we can talk. Hello, I'm Latoya Stirrup, and I will be also co-hosting our webinar today. So just a little bit, as Michelle mentioned, Black Girl Ventures is the brainchild of Shelley Bell, and she started Black Girl Ventures to address unique challenges Black and brown women were facing in accessing social and financial capital to grow their businesses. So since starting in 2016, Black Girl Ventures has funded 76 women of color, held over 25 BGV pitch programs across 8 cities, and served over 170 participants. Black Girl Ventures pledges to accelerate over 100,000 Black and brown women identifying entrepreneurs through community building as a service, which is also CBAS, shifting the idea of community building from being viewed solely as a community service to a valid and viable business offering to ensure the development and growth of small businesses. We believe in a world where all ideas have a chance to succeed. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the team. And Michelle, I'll let you go ahead and do your introduction as our lead change agent. Okay, Michelle may be not able to connect, so I'll go ahead and introduce her really quick. So Michelle McCoy is our lead change agent for the Black Girl Ventures Miami chapter. She is a visionary who isn't afraid to put action behind her thoughts. She's the co-founder of Miami VR Expo, a business development consultant with a passion for film, tech, and the arts. She currently promotes VR education and community engagement. Next up, we have Benita Gordon. Benita, are you able to chat? Do I see you still? Okay, so Benita is an edupreneur. She is the founder of Global Education Concierge, BG LLC, where concierge services, coaching, and consulting is provided to help eliminate educational roadblocks with parents, educators, educational institutions, and community stakeholders. She is also the founder of GGEC Academy and online virtual homeschool. So Benita has all of her contact information. Definitely reach out to Benita, as she is a fantastic resource, especially right now as we're dealing with virtual school, as well as going back into the school system. Next on our team, we have Miss Lisa Wilkinson. Go ahead, I'll let you introduce yourself. Oh, I think you're muted still.
I am sorry about that. Hello, everyone. I am also a BGV change agent in Miami. I am a therapist, consultant. I help other behavioral health therapists be able to open up their own outpatient therapy practices. I am a serial entrepreneur. I also own a CBD company and a billing company. And I'm glad to be here today, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. And Lisa will also be in the chat room. So if you have questions, be sure to use the Q&A portion, as she will be monitoring our chat and Q&A, which we'll do after the presentation. So thanks, Lisa. And last but not least, myself, Latoya Stirrup. As I mentioned, I'm an entrepreneur, producer, coach, strategist, a little bit of everything. I have over 16 years of experience in advertising. I am co-host of Tech Beats and Bytes, president of Digital Grass, and I also co-founded Cosmology, a company that I started with my two sisters to create innovative hair tools and accessories that are made for textured hair. So feel free to visit me at latoyastirrup.com to learn more about me and connect with me online. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Miss Rebecca Donta. Rebecca, give us a quick wave. I know I'm going to pass the mic to you in a second, but we are ecstatic to have her on with us today, as she is the managing director of Miami Angels, the largest angel network in Florida, which funds seed and Series A technology companies with early traction across various sectors. Miami Angels has deployed $14.2 million into 33 companies since 2014. And Rebecca built a sustainable independent business model for the organization. Prior to joining Miami Angels, Rebecca managed global campus operations for General Assembly in New York City, which is huge. I used to love that organization when I lived in New York. And the first accelerated learning provider and the top most innovative company in education per Fast Company. General Assembly had a successful exit in 2018. Prior to that, Rebecca worked at Macy's in their executive development program. Rebecca is a Miami native, Go 305, who's passionate about investing into markets and teams that are often overlooked in traditional venture capital. She serves on the board of the Florida Venture Forum and is a Class 11 member of Miami Fellows. Please welcome Rebecca Donta to the virtual stage.
Woo!
Thank you so much, Rebecca. We are delighted to have you.
Latoya, those presentations were awesome. I'm like feeling so much energy. I'm so excited to be here. I feel like we're actually like in person and there's people cheering and all that.
I know.
I totally feel the virtual clap. But I loved hearing all of your bios. You guys are amazing. So it's such an honor to be here with everyone. So I know this is a webinar, but I really want to hear from the audience and even my fellow panelists today. So if you guys have questions, I hope you do. I'm super excited to answer them and make sure that we talk about the things that you guys are thinking about and what's on your mind. So I'm going to start sharing my presentation, and actually I'm going to put my trusty timer so I don't talk all day because I have a lot to say to you guys. So I'm going to put myself a few minutes here. All right, so let's get started. Can you guys see my presentation? Just give me a nod because I see you, Latoya. Okay, cool. So first, what I'm going to do today is tell you guys a little bit about Miami Angels, and then I'm going to explain the format that I chose for today. So as Latoya mentioned in the introduction, we're an angel network. What does that mean? That means that we have no committed capital, and each of our individual investors are the ones who actually make the decisions. So what I do is I meet the companies, I analyze them, I find the ones that are the best fit to match our thesis, which I'll explain in the next slide, and then the actual investors get together and decide which companies they invest in. So that's the way that most angel groups work, versus when you're talking to a fund, they have the money already committed and there's a few investment partners making the decisions. That's the difference here. And another part of our mission is that being in Miami, we got started in 2014 when there wasn't a whole lot of entrepreneurship locally. So part of our mission has always been strengthening the startup ecosystem, not only in Miami, but in Florida, and making sure that we're educating other entrepreneurs and investors about the asset class. There weren't a whole lot of people investing in technology back in 2014, and I'm really proud that now there's like 100 more people in Miami doing it than they were before. So this is our thesis. We invest in software companies and medical devices. So and the stage we invest in is typically pre-seed. That's a little more rare to invest pre-seed, like pre-revenue. Then seed is some revenue, anywhere from 100,000 to about $1 million per year. And then we'll even sometimes do Series A companies. But the most common, the kind of sweet spot, is seed stage companies that are just getting to market and have some revenue traction. These are the 4 things that we most often look at. And you probably hear a lot of investors say this, but it really is true that team is the most important thing, especially with an early stage company. Why? Because if you look at most unicorn companies today, many have pivoted. And what's the common factor? The founder. So what I always tell investors is, do not invest if you want the team to change. Don't fall in love with the product and not the team. It needs to be the opposite. Fall in love with the team because the product may change. The product is, of course, important too. It needs to be something unique, and it needs to be the right timing. For example, maybe the market's not ready for your idea yet. Or maybe the question is, well, how are you going to get the market to this product? Maybe your market doesn't realize that this is an issue that they have. And of course, it needs to be a massive market. That is why many times investors don't invest in often brick and mortar businesses, because they don't have the same scalability as software companies do. The margins aren't the same. So maybe you've heard that question before if you have a brick and mortar business of a venture capitalist asking you that. That's the reason. At the end of the day, they're looking for margins and huge returns. So if you have that type of business, then there's other funding routes for you. It just may not be typical venture capital. So a little bit about how today's going to go now. And by the way, I'm happy to answer any questions about Miami Angels as well. So, and for my fellow panelists, I can't see the questions. So if something urgent comes up, feel free to just interrupt me. So what I decided to do today with the time that we have, because I'm going to be speaking to you for about 25 minutes, I could go on talking about the deck for like 2 or 3 hours. And instead, what I'm going to do is give you a framework for not only your deck, but pitching and finding and getting in front of investors, because all those things go together and they're all super important. And what I'm gonna send to you after today is a whole template going through each slide of a pitch deck and what it should have. So you'll be able to either work on your deck for the first time or edit your deck with the template that I'm gonna give you. And I have a resource guide if you are at the pre-seed stage of a bunch of investors nationally who invest at your stage. So with that, let's get into it. And the first thing I'm going to say is a caveat. Decks are like resumes. There's so many different opinions out there. It can be really overwhelming. Maybe something I tell you today is contradictory to what someone else told you last week. That's okay, because there's so many different ways to look at it. So take my advice with a grain of salt. At the end of the day, it's your business, and I want you to do what's best for what you think. I'm going to share, I've heard a ton of pitches before and a ton of pitch decks, and I'm going to share some of the standout things that I've personally seen, things that I've seen investors like and want to invest in, and that's what I'm here to share with you today. So if you're early stage, it's super important that your deck is not very long. Why? Because we look at many decks per day. I look at maybe 100 decks a week. So how much time do I have to each of those? I probably go through a deck in about 2 to 3 minutes. So it's super important that in about 30 seconds, I understand what your business does, and I need to be able to get through it. One of the most important things when you're just emailing your deck to an investor is that they understand what the business does and what your traction is. That's always what I'm trying to figure out, those 2 questions. And it's a very frustrating feeling to have read through the whole deck, spent the 3 minutes, and still have no clue. So a pro tip that I always give people is send your deck to someone who has no clue what you do. If it's like a very tech software business, send it to like your aunt or your grandmother. Ask them if they understand it, because they should. It's important. Of course, at the end of the day, your audience is investors and they know, but think about it. We don't know what your business is either when we get your deck, and we need to try to understand it quickly. Then, your deck doesn't need to be done by a graphic designer necessarily. If you want to do it that way, great, they come out amazing. The important thing is that the information is conveyed clearly and concisely. So below these bullet points, these are the things that a deck should cover. Some of you might take this literally and literally make a, however many bullet points this is, a 10-page slide deck with each of these titles. That's okay too. But make sure that all of these topics are covered in your deck. And in the resource guide, in the template guide I'm going to send you all at the end, I go through each of these and tell you what you should cover within each slide. And then also today in the Q&A, let's say many of you have questions about the market slide or the competitor slide, I'll actually show you that and we can deep dive into it as well. Okay, so depending on your pitch too, you can change your deck. So let's say you're doing a pitch competition and they tell you only have 2 minutes. More or less, 5 slides is good. So depending on, you give yourself like a minute or 30 seconds to a minute per slide, and that's how you can figure out your timing. Super important to keep everything very clean and not cluttered. This slide right here is not a great example because it has a lot of text, but I have a lot of information to tell you guys. Infographics, I love infographics personally. I think it's a great way to share information. Another important thing is that when you're presenting versus when you're sending a deck, it can be a little different. So you don't want to email a deck that has no text because then they won't understand it. And then you don't want to present a deck that's all text because then they're just reading the slide. Remember, you want to impress them with you, so you really want to talk about yourself. Some people say to me, oh my gosh, it's so overwhelming, I have to have 2 decks. I think it's okay. I think what is okay is having the same kind of framework deck, and then the one that you're going to email, just add a little more text on each slide to explain things. Always show, don't tell. So instead of saying we have so much traction, say show any growth metrics that you might have. Talked about infographics, just concisely summarize the main points too. So when you're doing this email deck, put like 1 or 2 lines on like what you want them to know. Think about when you're presenting, your audience is going to take whatever you're showing them. So always ask yourself, what information do I want them to latch on to here? If I'm talking about my CAC to LTV, they're going to ask about that. Do I want them to ask about that on this slide? All right. And then at the end, you want to add your own additional insights as well. Some other things on the pitch deck, always check the most basic things. Check for grammar, math errors. Maybe you have on one slide, you show your projections as one number, but on another slide, it's different. Be super into the details on that stuff because it's not the end of the world to not have everything perfectly done, but really what you're trying to convey is that you pay attention to details and that you've really taken the time to make an awesome presentation, because it's the reputation that you're giving yourself at the very beginning. Consistent formatting throughout, your font type and size. Anything, just make it very easy to read. If letters are too big, it's hard. If letters are too small, it's also hard. And there's no strict rules on this. It's not like how resumes used to be that it needs to be in Times New Roman. A little tip that I heard from a graphic designer is don't use dashes for your bullets because it makes things look negative. Try to use other styled bullets. It doesn't need to be the round thing, but don't use the lines. And then to send your deck, I'm all about keeping things simple. So I like PDFs, or a lot of entrepreneurs really like, and I think it's great too, DocSend, because it allows you to edit live as you make changes, and it allows you to see who's accessing your deck because the person has to enter their email. And so when you're ready to send it, convert it into those 2 things. When you're working on your deck, use whatever platform, PowerPoint, PDF, Google Slides is most comfortable for you. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about finding the right investors. So always review their portfolio before. Don't just go online and pull a list of investors and like spray and pray to everyone. Why? Because if you send a competitive deck, first of all, if there's a portfolio company that does the same thing as yours, they're not going to invest, because investors do not invest in competitive portfolio companies. And second of all, they may even send it to their portfolio because they want to protect their portfolio. So be really careful with that. Investors, for the most part, are not out to get you. You don't have to worry about them copying your idea. I've heard a lot of fears around that. Investors will be out of a job really quickly if they get a reputation for stealing entrepreneurs' ideas. But it is true that if someone sends a deck, they may send it to a portfolio company. But if there's strategic companies in the portfolio, that is a great investor to think about for your company, to invest in you. And they can be helpful for you because they can make introductions for potential clients, future acquirers even. So that is good. The other thing you want to look at is make sure you fit their industry focus. Maybe on their website they say they're B2B only and you're B2C. Not really worth it, because most of the time investors don't go outside of their thesis. Check the size of the capital that they invest, and then go where the investors are to find them. And it's Twitter. It's not LinkedIn. Most investors are very active on Twitter. So a great way to start connecting with people, if it's cold outreach, is follow them, start replying to their stuff. They'll appreciate it. And sometimes even better than email, maybe you don't have their email, you can DM them on Twitter. And then
Rebecca, we have a question.
Yeah,
and it's
go
kind
ahead.
of related to what you're talking about. So Imani asks, do you recommend sending decks to investors? How do you protect your IP?
Okay, great question. So like I said before, investors actually won't sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, because it opens them up to unnecessary liability, because investors are not in the business of stealing ideas, because they'll be out of business really quickly. They're in the business of investing in ideas and supporting entrepreneurs. So I would operate from a place of, I'm trying to raise capital and they're trying to invest in companies, and give the benefit of the doubt. But that's the only reason why you should do your research before, to check their portfolio. The other thing is, in an email, you should send your deck and you should be comfortable to do it, because you're out there selling. So you can't come from a place of trying to keep everything. But what I do recommend is, if you're going to be sending your deck to people that you don't have a relationship with yet, which you should, maybe just don't put the most private information in the main deck. It's okay to have like a kind of initial deck that you send people that talks about the problem you're solving, your product, your traction. And then if they say, hey, I really like it, let's get on a call, then you can maybe on the call share the deck that has your projections, your market research, your competition. That's perfectly okay. But don't go into it necessarily worried about protecting the IP, because it doesn't happen with investors. And the best thing really is to send them your deck, because they want to learn about your business. I hope that answers your question. I'm going to keep going on. Other things to do is review the investor backgrounds. Maybe you find out that you went to the same college as one of the people you're going to present to, or you happen to work together, or you had a friend who worked there. Anytime that you can kind of create that common humanity, it breaks the ice and it just goes so much smoother. Practice what you're going to say, nail down the flow, the slide transition. Timing is super important. VCs will give you half an hour or an hour for the meeting, and it's really important that you're cognizant of their time. So if it's half an hour, make your presentation maybe 15 minutes. The other thing I recommend is asking them, do you prefer I go through my whole pitch deck and I present to you, or do you prefer that we have a conversation and you ask me questions and I maybe just show a slide as reference? One of the things, like personally, that frustrates me as the investor is when I can't get a word in. I want to be able to ask you questions. I have follow-up. So kind of give pauses, ask them if they have questions as well. And then be yourself. They're investing in you at the end of the day. Example, if you're not someone who's funny, don't come in and try to do a bunch of jokes because you think that you need to. If you are someone who's funny, be yourself, make a joke, make things casual. That's perfectly okay. Also, ask the investors to introduce themselves, because you want to be able to understand who you're talking to as well. It's going to help you to tailor your pitch, and it'll go so much smoother. Okay, tips on pitching effectively. Talk about who you are, who the company is. One thing that really stands out to me, I actually heard it that like a month ago for the first time, and I really liked it. So now I share this tip, which is typically the team slide is at the end, and that's okay. But so many times people go into the pitch and they're just like, hi, I'm here to talk to you about this company. Here's what we do. And you're the one pitching and it's your company, and the person has no idea who you are. So one thing you can do is say, I'm Rebecca. I built this company. Let's say it's something that's for lactation, because when I was breastfeeding, I had a lot of issues. Like, you can talk about things personally and why it kind of comes back to you, and while you are the right person for this business. And then you get into it and they feel like they know you a little more, because like I said, they're investing in you. So you can also kind of make, when you make that story personal, it's like the quick hook, it grabs them, it pulls them in. It's not like some far off person who saw a problem and is just trying to make money. There's nothing wrong with that, but when it comes back to you as the business owner, it's just so much stronger. Try to tell a story and walk them through. The most important thing is that they understand the problem. I think sometimes as women, maybe we're in a business that sells to women and we're speaking to men. Like, that can be really tough, but do what you can to get them into the shoes of the customer and to understand it. Reference things people know and understand. Yes.
We have another quick question in the chat about how investors, how do you get the investors to talk about themselves?
I think at the beginning, it's perfectly fine to say, I'm so excited to be here. Can you tell me a little bit more about you and the fund as well? And like, they'll be comfortable to talk about the fund, or you can even say, how did you get into investing? In a couple slides from now, I have a few other questions that you can ask too. One thing that's often overlooked by entrepreneurs is that you can and should do due diligence on investors. It's probably like 1 out of 50 entrepreneurs ask me questions ever, and I'm always surprised. I'm so happy to answer any questions. And it's okay to kind of not necessarily be tough, but say like, what's your process? What's your criteria? What's the timeline expected? How do you support companies? Because you're also trying to find the right investor, and it is so important that you don't kind of sign a contract with the wrong person. Everyone says it's like marriage. So you're kind of stuck with that person. So know what you're getting into and ask questions for sure. And you can either do it at the end or the beginning. I think either way is fine. I think most likely for you to pitch, you're going to feel more comfortable if you ask them a little bit about themselves and the fund. I mean, show that you've done your research on the fund, of course, but it just kind of breaks the ice if you know a little more about who you're talking to. You want to show the right opportunity. So convey that it's a big market. That's so important, because the investor's trying to calculate the return. This is venture capital. It's got to reach a ton of people for it to work, for them to get the returns in their portfolio. So it needs to be a big problem reaches a big market, and then you have to have the right solution for that. The right team. What are some of the qualities on the team? So I'm personally okay. Well, first of all, everyone knows that when founders give projections, they're not always going to be correct. So you don't have to break your head over that, because it's really hard to get that number right, and investors don't expect it. What they do expect is that you're willing to change it as time goes on. Here's an example. This year, COVID, crazy times, we were looking at investing in a business that said that their projections for this year were 2 million by December, right? They pitched to us in August, and they were at 200,000 in revenue. Do we think they're going to get to 2 million by December? No, that's what they had projected back in January, and that's fine. But at this point, it's like, well, why weren't you at least updating it? Because it's just clear that there's no way you're going to get to that. So it's not necessarily about getting to that number, but it's about showing that you have a big vision. So oftentimes we'll pass on a company too if they're too conservative in their projections. Not because they were too conservative, but more the concerns about like, this maybe doesn't have venture capital style returns. It's not going to be as big as we're hoping for. So you want to think big but realistic, and then change it as time goes on. That's my tips on that. But all of that is, the qualities are about being honest and real, less about always being right. That's the point that I'm trying to share here. Another thing is that if I ask someone a question and they don't know, I'm okay with you saying, I don't know. Okay, now, if it's a 15-minute Q&A and you say, I don't know to everything, that's one thing. But once in a while, if there's one question, maybe it's really tech related and you're not the technical co-founder, it's okay to say, let me look into that and I'll get back to you. I would much prefer that than making up an answer, because we want to get to know you, that you're real. Another important thing is that you have a big vision, but that you're willing to take feedback. So you don't want to be just accepting always of whatever everyone tells you, because you have to kind of have a firm idea of your business, but you need to be willing to listen. Another thing is like, it's a data point for investors. If they give you feedback or they pass on the company and you get really nasty with them, it's hard to hear no, but always just try to be super polite about it. Because, for example, we've invested in companies like 6 months down the road that we've passed on. But if the feedback that we give them doesn't go well, it's kind of like, ooh, I found something out about that person that I didn't know. I talked about make the audience laugh if it's your thing. Don't do a comedy routine. Don't just read the slides. Make sure that you're comfortable connecting with the audience. If you are truly uncomfortable with public speaking, but you have a co-founder who's amazing at it, maybe think about having them give the presentation and you're just kind of there for like Q&A and other things like that. Because it's just really important that they're able to get to know the information in the business. You should be there though, because they want to get to know the founding team. The other thing is, I don't know if you guys have heard of or been approached by people who charge you for investor intros. I think that that's very predatory, because that shouldn't cost money. Entrepreneurs are in the business of building their business and not paying people to make investor introductions. And in fact, many investors put their email on their website and are willing to talk to people. So the point of that is that, that's my alarm for time. The point of that is, we want to talk to you and not this third-party consultant who's charging you. So definitely be the one to reach out to investors. And I'm getting to the end for this part too. So just some words of wisdom on everything I covered. There's no right number of slides or order. It's only the critical points that you need to cover. Be 10 times better at what you're doing. So you all have probably seen that competition slide that has a bunch of like check boxes and it compares you versus your competitors. If you only have 1 or 2 check boxes more than your competitors, either rethink the business or rethink the slide, because it's not so much better if you're only doing 1 or 2 things more than the next person who's well-funded and has more traction than you. Focus on your customer's number 1 problem. Like, what is their biggest pain point, and go after solving that. Prepare yourself for a rejection. When you do hear no from an investor, it's perfectly okay to ask why and try to learn so that you can get better. There's a lot of great ideas out there. This goes back to people versus product. Only a few people can execute them. What I try to look at when looking at potential investments is this the right person, and can this person solve this problem? Not, will this solution work? Because it's really hard to tell if a solution will work or not. So you need to prove to them that you're the person who can lead this business through whatever problems may arise, because they will. This is what I mentioned before. Ask the investors questions. So some of the really great questions I've gotten are, you do a meeting, ask what are next steps? When can I expect to hear back? Ask them, what is their process? What's their top criteria for choosing investments? How do they support their portfolio company? I'm going to say something a little bit potentially controversial, which is that if it's your first check, take it. It does not need to be strategic investment from the very beginning, because it's hard to get your first check. It's hard to get someone to believe in you when you maybe don't have a ton of traction. Believe in yourself. Get that first check, get enough funding to get to where you need to go. And then when you have traction, you'll have the investors knocking on your door and you can pick and choose the strategic ones. But what that also doesn't mean is to take investment from predatory investors who are putting terrible terms or are just rude people, like you don't like working with them. So it's a balance, right? It doesn't need to be strategic, but don't take it from a terrible person either. It may just be someone who's willing to write you a check and says run with it. That's what I mean. Like, that part is actually okay. And when I say predatory terms, what it means is like type of terms that you're going to be owing that person money for the rest of your life and you don't ever get money out of this business in the long run, or that they want to take ownership of practically your whole company, because that hurts not only you but your future fundraising, because new investors don't want to invest if the founder doesn't own enough of the company. So that's why asking questions is super important, because at the end of the day, it's about get to know them. And then this is the tip also that I gave at the beginning of talk about why you decided to solve this problem, why it's important to you, and why you're the right person to do this. Let them get to know you. This is a little bit of information on local investors in Miami, in South Florida. More and more, there's more seed capital. Most of these look for some revenue when they invest though. So in the guide that I'm going to send you, it has a ton of resources, links on pitch decks, on how to hire, and then a bunch of pre-seed venture capital investors that you can look out for. So now I'm going to come off screen share and we can talk about questions. And then, like I said, I have the specific slides as well. So if you guys want to deep dive on any topic, we can go into that.
Perfect. And before we kick into Q&A, thank you so much, Rebecca, for that. I mean, every topic that you went through, there's like 10 other things that we could talk about each bullet point, just because fundraising, investing, pitch decks are so important for so many of us. And to be able to get this insight from you is huge, right? Because you're seeing the pitch decks, you're helping to decide who gets funding. So you're literally, everyone who's in the webinar, you're hearing it from the horse's mouth, literally. And it's great information. So Lisa, I will actually open it up for you. Do we have any questions in the Q&A?
Hello, we do. Sorry, I was trying to get my camera together. It doesn't seem to be working. But yes, so we answered some of the questions real time, which again, thank you so much for that information. That was really helpful. One of the questions is, how do you make yourself known to angel investors? You gave the information about no predatory, not allowing people to make the connections for you if they're going to charge you. So how do you make yourself known?
Like getting in front of them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So warm intros are a great way. So LinkedIn is good for that, and Twitter too, I guess. But LinkedIn's a little better for understanding like mutual connections, right? So all VCs do have LinkedIn. They're just not quite as active there with like requests and DMs for the most part. But what it is helpful for is checking mutual connections. So let's say I want to connect with partner at so-and-so fund. I go on and LaToya and I are friends, and I see that she knows that person. So I reach out to LaToya. I'm like, LaToya, be a pal. Will you introduce me? But in all seriousness, the best thing to do for warm intros is make it easy for your friend. because they're your friend and they love you, but they're probably busy too. So what you should do is, what I would do is send Latoya the email saying, Latoya, I would love to connect with Stacy at that company. Would you be willing to connect us? Here's a little bit about my company. So all Latoya has to do is forward the email. She doesn't have to come up and create some new email and think about, how am I going to describe Rebecca's company? I don't even know Rebecca's company. You do it all for that. So you put the blurb, you can attach your pitch deck. She forwards it and says, hey Stacy, are you willing to be introduced to my friend Rebecca? She's building an awesome company. Stacy says yes. Boom, connected. So, and Stacy is more willing to reply to the introduction because she knows Latoya and she trusts that Latoya will introduce her to good people. So warm intros is the number one way. What about when you're not connected, you have no mutual connections? Check the VC's website. A lot of times they include their email on the website. If they don't, they definitely have a team page, or like 80% of the time. Then go start searching each individual partner, and then look for them on LinkedIn and Twitter. And then if you don't have any of the mutual connections, they don't have their email, then go on to see if they're on Twitter, find them and follow them, start liking some of their stuff, start replying, kind of add to their page, and then try to DM them. And in those messages, you want to be super short and to the point because they get a lot of DMs. So just say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm reaching out because, try to customize it, say why you like that investor, and include your pitch deck if you can. Because a lot of times founders say to me, hey, can I send you my pitch deck? Now we're just having extra back and forth. Like, I want to see your pitch deck. That's how I'm going to know about your company. So no need to ask, just send it.
Okay, thank you. That was really good information. The questions are rolling in. Along these lines, there was a question from Michelle that asked about, is her business is less than 1 month old. Is it too early to get pre-seed money?
I think as long as you can wait to raise capital, that's the best thing. Raising capital is always like applauded, but like at the end of the day, it's about building a good business. So if you don't need venture capital funding, don't take it right away, because the more traction that you have, the less time it's going to take to raise capital, and the better valuation that you'll be able to get for your business.
Okay, thank you for that information too. Along those same lines, there is another question about how important is it to have statistics in your slides when you're doing the pitch deck?
If statistics are metrics, I'm not sure exactly what statistics means. Maybe whoever asked it, if you want to clarify in the chat, but if they're metrics about like growth and whatnot, you 100% don't make a pitch deck without it. And if you don't have revenue traction, what are some other metrics that you can show? You can show how many downloads you have, if it's like an app, how many users you have. And one thing that's really attractive to investors in the early stages is that you're not like paying for your users. So it's not through digital or paid marketing. Anytime you can show that people are finding you, because what does that mean? That you're solving a problem that's so necessary that people are searching for you. So they love any companies like that. So if you can show any type of organic user growth, organic means people coming to you without paying, is amazing. Any type of customer feedback that you can show, get creative.
Thank you. That was a good response. That question was from Judy. So if she has more,
yeah,
perfect.
She
Okay. Okay, great. And there's another question from Kiana. She says her company created a new line, and what's the best approach to answer questions about traction, revenue, and or the team? And then the second part is, it is okay to focus on customer usability over profitability when seeking funds, which part of that answer you may have given about the last one, but Kiana, let us know if you want some further answer to that question. Customer usability over profitability.
Okay, I see the question here.
Okay.
has created a new lane. Oh, like is it that your market doesn't necessarily exist? What is the best approach when these are your areas of focus? Customer use. Okay, got it. Thank you for clarifying. So it's a new concept. So I guess the point is that traction's going to take a little longer, right? I think in that case, what you want to focus on is the future. Like, be upfront about it. Like, make sure that they understand that you're not going to have people buying your product within 1 month. But so what you want to sell people on is the vision and the huge market that's opening up down the road. And also in that case, like, so when you're in a market that's new, right? You probably don't have a ton of competitors. So that one is attractive. You want to make sure that they know that. And in a market that does have a lot of competitors, what you're trying to show is, here's how we're going to take away our customers from the existing companies out there. In your case, you're saying, here's how we're going to get people to know about this and use this product. It's kind of like education, similar to think about when back in the day when Uber started, they were taking away from taxis, but they weren't taking away from other app-based ride sharing. It's a new behavior. So you're going to talk about how you're getting people on the new behavior. And yes, you won't be profitable for a long time, and that's very normal and understandable. But don't try to hide it, because you need to have an investor who understands that, right? And they're not going to be pushing you to be profitable in a year when the market's just not ready for you. So talk about, for sure, usability and growth over time.
Thank you for that. The next question is from Talia. I am looking to sell a training web app to companies for use of their customers and stakeholders. Is there a different approach to pitching this idea? I've considered looking for a company that might sponsor the build and be the first to use it.
So I've heard of that before. We've had companies do that, where it's almost an investment, but it's a company who needs your product so badly that they're willing to pay you to build it and be the first users and whatnot. I think that that's a good way to fund something at the beginning. I have no issues with that. I think we've gotten really close to investing in companies who do it. So I think when you're in the process with that, I wouldn't try to raise capital at the exact same time. Like, try to make that partnership with that company enough to sustain your business to build it, and then go raise capital and say, we have a product deployed. Our first customer loves us, and get as much customer feedback from them as possible for when you go to pitch.
Thank you. That was a creative idea. Okay. I am just checking the chat to see if there are any other questions. Remember, you can put your questions in the Q&A, but I'm just browsing the chat for a second.
No worries. And we do have a few more minutes, so feel free, let the questions flow. And in the actual chat, not the Q&A box, the BGV team has placed Rebecca's information, so you connect with her after the webinar. And I believe we saw some other questions about if this will be available once the webinar ends, and the answer is yes. Kamari, if you could repost the link to where everyone can access this afterwards, that'll be great in the chat. And while we're waiting, I have a question for you, Rebecca. And this is actually something that we kind of talked about offline, is about the financial projections, right? And how often, especially women, when we do our projections, we tend to be very conservative, right? Not trying to oversell, overpromise, kind of being right in that spot where we're like, yeah, this is what we feel comfortable with, what we can do. And I know you talked about sort of living bigger and showing that on paper. What advice do you have about overcoming that tendency in order to really sort of showcase and highlight what your business can do financially?
Maybe show it to a guy. They have this chip in themselves where they're so confident all the time. Seriously, it's crazy. As a woman that works in a male-dominated field, it's so interesting to see the differences. And it's true, they're very aggressive. I think often we tend to be risk averse, and we never want to overpromise. But you're an entrepreneur and you have to think big. So know that maybe, and I don't want to stereotype, maybe you don't have that tendency, but no matter what, it's always helpful to have someone else review what you're working on. So think about your friend who's like if you are the one who tends to like hold back a little bit, find a friend who's like the most kind of out there visionary person that you know, and say like, does this seem fair? What do you think? Get their opinion on it. But at the end of the day, whenever you're getting advice, go with your gut at the end of the day, because you're the business owner.
Great advice. Great advice. And we did have another question come in. It says, Rebecca, do you offer office hours to review pitch decks with a smiley face?
I actually don't have open office hours, but like my emails on the website, and I end up just doing it one-on-one as people reach out to me. Super active on Twitter too. Like if you DM me and say, Rebecca, can we talk? We'll meet. Especially women. I do a lot of one-on-one meetings with women, and I'll tell you one thing, be prepared. I try to be super honest, because what I realize is that a lot of times as women, the feedback that we get is like, maybe this your company idea or your deck is not venture backable. I'm going to tell you, because I see so many times if an investor comes and gives advice knowing that that company is not the right fit, but they say it anyway because it sounds nicer. I want to try to help you succeed, and I don't want you to spin your wheels. So I'm going to say, try to change this or do this, or think about your business in a different way. I think that's really necessary. So that's the way I try to support other women.
And really quick, before I saw it, we had a question come in, just to unpack that a little bit more. What makes a company venture backable? What is that sort of hallmark of that baseline that's like, okay, now you can be invested in for VC funding?
Yeah, so the whole way, venture capital is high risk, high reward. Thinking from the investor perspective, I'm gonna pretend like I'm talking to investors, so you know this too. 80% of companies fail. So what investors try to look for is the biggest possible company. Biggest meaning the revenues are high enough, because the other thing is that 90% of startups get acquired and only 10% go public. So when looking at those acquisitions, companies take a multiple of your revenue, and it's typically 5 to 10 times that. So what an investor is doing when they're looking at you is saying, how much revenue can you have in 5 to 10 years, and multiply that times 5, and will you be able to sell for that price? And what they want on their investment is a 10x return. They want their money to be at least 10x. They want it to be higher actually, but they won't invest in a company unless the company can sell for 10 times what they invested in 10 years, ideally even higher. So whatever your valuation is, that's how you want to think about it. Your revenue, multiple, sale price down the road. So that is the whole reason why investors look for really big markets, because you can't have that much revenue unless you can have a big market. You say, well, our market's not that big, but we can sell for high. Most companies only capture like a small percent of the market. So let me actually talk about really quickly my market slide. What you want to do in your market slide is show, okay, here it is. Let me go to 1 second, share my screen again. Okay, so TAM, total addressable market. What you want to try to show to investors is the whole size of the market. So let's talk about, we'll do the basic, what's a good example? The other day, and I don't want to say something too specific, I'm trying to think on my feet here. Let's use the basic Uber example, right? The total addressable market was, at the beginning, it's anyone who uses taxis or transportation, right? But then it's like, what is the actual market share that we can accomplish? So you want to show how big the overall market is, and then you want to see the size that you're going after. I think Uber only started in like the big cities like San Francisco, New York. So then you go down to that market, and then you say, what % of those cities can can we get? And basically what you want to show them is like, in a reasonable way, with 1% of the market, we'll get 50 million or 10 million in revenue. By year 2, we get X percent of the market, we'll be at this percent of revenue. So I hope that makes sense. That was a really long-winded answer, but it's super important.
No, that was a great answer. And Lisa, do we have any more Q&As?
We do. Yes, we have 2 more questions. I'm just going to do a quick thank you to Rebecca. I cannot believe you take time out to respond to all your DMs and make office hours for people. So I think that's great. So the first question is from Rebecca. What is a good financial projection, or what would you consider profitable for VC that will qualify us?
So you actually don't need to be profitable at the beginning. You just need to show a path to profitability by 7 to 10 years. So that you build into your projections. It's really hard for me to just say a specific number on what a good financial projection is, but do the math like I told you of the valuation that you're at today, how much revenue you could potentially have, and can it be 10x that or more eventually. And then I see the second question as a follow-up about pitching a company. Do you have any advice on pitching to initiate? I don't understand the question. Do any of the panelists understand and you want to rephrase for me? Pitching a company.
You're talking about the one from Kendall?
Oh, having the company pay you
Yes.
to build it.
Mm-hmm.
Any advice for pitching that?
Or is it different to pitch for another company for that partnership versus when you're pitching for an investor?
That I don't know, because I haven't been in those shoes. You know what? Let me think about that a little bit. I can get back to the Black Girl Ventures team, and maybe they can say it. I'm not 100% sure about what that pitch would look like, because the general advice I would have is like, don't do cold outreach saying like, hey, we can build this for you. I think it needs to be a little bit of a relationship building and really understand what their problems are. But I would need to think about that a little more. And then there's a question on, is it possible to evaluate a company without any revenue? Absolutely. There's whole investors who dedicate themselves to pre-seed funding, which is one of the resource guides that I'm going to send you all. And what it's about there is a lot of what I shared, the team and the vision.
Good stuff. Okay, is that it? I think we're almost at 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Did you already answer the question? I apologize about the book. Do you have a book suggestion that would help expand our knowledge on this process? That question was in the chat earlier.
Yeah. For angel investing, Jason Calacanis has a book called Angel. All of these speak to the investor perspective, but it's so important for entrepreneurs to hear from the investor perspective, because you got to get in their head and understand how they're thinking about multiples. So Angel by Jason Calacanis is good. VC Deals, I think that's Brad Feld and Fred Wilson. And then this one's more about management and how hard it is and how many trials and tribulations there are, but it's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And that one was written by Mark Andreessen, I believe, who founded Andreessen Horowitz, one of the best VC firms.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. Everyone who attended today, I hope you had a fantastic time. We learned a lot. I know tons of notes. Good thing is that you'll be able to access the replay as well as the resources. Again, that information is in the chat, so that way you can make sure you connect with us on BGV Connect. And be sure to follow us as well. And I think we had our email address. Lisa, I saw you posted that in the chat as well. So the email address to follow us is there, bgvconnect.com, and follow us at BGV_Miami on Instagram. Rebecca, any last words before we end?
I loved being with you guys. Reach out. I want to help. I want to be a resource. Let's get more female-founded companies funded.
Yes. All right. And it was a pleasure to everyone. Thank you again, and see us next month for our next webinar. See you all soon.
Bye, everyone.